In the archives of military engineering, few designs were as ingenious or as misunderstood as the Nissen hut. Born in the mud and chaos of 1916, it quietly became Britain's weapon of endurance. Decades later, when America tried to replicate its success, the results were impressive, yet never identical, somewhere between adaptation and ambition. The US version lost the principle that made Nissen's creation a masterpiece. Major Peter Norman Nissen, trudging through the mud of northern France, was not thinking about fame, but watching soldiers freeze to death. The Western Front was a graveyard of innovation, timber was scarce, canvas tents collapsed under snow, and every attempt at lasting shelter was destroyed by artillery or fatigue. Nissen, Canadian-born mining engineer in the Royal Engineers, noticed something others overlooked: stacks of unused corrugated iron sheets, meant for roofing, rusting near supply depots while men shivered in the cold. He sketched ideas in a soldier's notebook, drawing half circles and angles. The brilliance of his plan lay in simplicity. What if the roof became the walls? What if strength came from the curve? Within a week, he built a crude prototype, a half-cylinder of bent steel sheets, joined at the seams, requiring no beams or pillars. 6 ordinary soldiers erected it in under 4 hours, using only basic army tools. The design quickly evolved, with 2 more prototypes refining dimensions and testing materials. The final version used pre-drilled corrugated sheets, spaced perfectly 14 inches apart to eliminate measurement errors, and prefabricated wooden ends with doors and windows ready to bolt on. Even transport was engineered. Nissen and 3 draftsmen created packing diagrams showing how a complete hut could fit in a 3-ton truck, with room for 3 men. Every detail emphasized speed, precision, and practicality. In March 1916, the British Army approved testing, and at Richborough Port, the 172nd Tunneling Company assembled 20 huts in days, astonishing officers with shelters that could be shipped, packed, and built anywhere without architects, carpenters, or delay. By winter, the War Office ordered 10,000 units, and by the time the spring offensive raged, Nissen huts rose behind the lines faster than trenches could be dug. For soldiers long confined to canvas, the curved steel felt almost luxurious. 16 feet wide, each hut could house 30 men comfortably, with the curve distributing stress evenly, so blast waves and shrapnel deflected harmlessly across the metal. Vertical walls, the weakness of traditional structures, were gone. Bolts overlapped 3 layers of corrugated iron, forming a continuous shell, resistant even to nearby shellfire. Inside, conditions were basic but dry. Wooden floors kept men off damp ground, and adjustable vents at each end improved airflow and reduced condensation. Construction units even built Nissen huts under artillery fire to shelter the wounded, placing them on wooden sleepers, concrete, or directly on packed earth if speed demanded. With 6 men in a single day, they could erect a home in no man's land. By 1918, over 100,000 Nissen huts stood across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, forming the silent architecture of the British war effort. Barracks, supply depots, command posts, and field hospitals, uniform, reliable, and unmistakably British. The curved outline symbolized an empire's adaptability under pressure, prompting soldiers to joke that the huts might outlast them. Nissen himself never profited from the invention. As an active duty officer, he wasn't entitled to payment. The War Office, however, allowed him to patent the design after the war, and he returned to civilian life in 1919, a quiet man who had forever changed military engineering. When American engineers later studied the British blueprints, they admired the elegance but misunderstood it, seeing the design as almost too simple. The genius of the curved steel lost on them. Compared to America's industrial construction standards of the early 1940s, the Nissen hut, with its simple shell, modular ribs, and minimal floor, seemed almost primitive. So when the US Navy decided to produce its own version in 1941, they didn't copy it exactly. Instead, they redesigned it to be stronger, bigger, and heavier, creating what became the Quonset hut, named for Quonset Point Naval Air Station in Rhode Island. where the first prototypes were rapidly built. Within just 60 days, the first production models rolled out, larger than the original at 16 by 36 feet, and later expanded to 20 by 48 feet, complete with plywood ends, doors, and insulation. They could be packed flat, shipped anywhere, and assembled by untrained soldiers. By the war's end, over 150,000 had been built, turning the Quonset hut into a symbol of American logistical power. Yet despite this success, the Americans missed the feature that made the Nissen hut exceptional. The British design was more than a shelter. It was a model of efficiency, using minimal materials, requiring minimal labor, and capable of being disassembled and moved in hours. Its secret was the precise curvature of the shell, strong enough to resist snow and wind, yet light enough to transport on muddy roads and wooden carts. In contrast, the Americans altered the curve, making it wider and flatter to increase interior space. In doing so, they lost the mathematical perfection that made the Nissen hut self-supporting. The Quonset was stronger on paper but less efficient in practice, demanding more materials, insulation, and sometimes even a prepared foundation. While Nissen huts could stand on grass, dirt, or mud, Quonsets required careful site preparation, a distinction that became obvious during mass deployments across the Pacific. Still, the Quonset had advantages. It was more comfortable, versatile, and adaptable for offices, hospitals, workshops, and barracks. For American troops landing on remote islands from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, the curved steel shelters were a familiar sight, nicknamed tin cans or half moons, providing a small sense of home amidst chaos. By 1944, entire bases and field hospitals were built from Quonset huts alone. Meanwhile, British soldiers continued to use the original Nissen hut, simpler, cheaper, and colder, while Americans added plywood, insulation, and even small stoves. These differences reflected two philosophies, one born of necessity, the other of comfort. Even decades later, veterans and historians would recognize the enduring impact of both designs. The Nissen hut's design remained unmatched for sheer efficiency and portability. Although America's Quonset became more famous, it was ultimately a tribute to a largely forgotten British engineer who had solved a problem no blueprint could measure: the speed of survival. After the war, Quonset huts did not disappear. They multiplied. Across America's returning bases, the curved shells were sold to civilians for a few $100s each, becoming homes, classrooms, churches, and repair shops. Even today, scattered across the Midwest and Pacific Islands, their familiar half-circle silhouettes, rusted but still standing, are a testament to enduring design. Meanwhile, the Nissen hut lived on in Britain, thousands repurposed after 1945 as farms, stores, garages, and community halls. Yet while the Quonset became an American icon, Nissen's name quietly faded from history. Few realized that the design, which housed millions of soldiers, began in the mud of the Somme, sketched by a mining engineer unwilling to watch men die without shelter. There is a poetic irony in that. Peter Norman Nissen, the man who engineered speed and efficiency into steel, died of pneumonia in 1930 at only 58, never witnessing his invention protect another generation of soldiers. When war returned in 1939, Nissen Buildings Limited waived all royalties, allowing Britain to produce huts freely for the war effort. They did not profit financially, but they made history. Across the Atlantic, Americans industrialized the idea, refined the materials, and stamped their name on it, but never denied its origin. Official US Navy records from 1941 described the Quonset plainly as an adaptation of the British Nissen hut, a gesture of imitation and admiration. In the end, this is not a story of rivalry, but of two nations solving the same problem in their own way. Britain creating the design that won time on the battlefield, America scaling it into a symbol of global logistics. Together, they produced something that outlived them both, a structure born of war yet remembered for endurance, adaptability, and human ingenuity. Today, every arched steel shed, prefab dome in disaster zones, And emergency shelter on distant shores carries a trace of Nissen's curve. A quiet reminder that the simplest ideas born in desperation can outlast empires.